Welcome to Bookkast, where we bring you bestsellers in minutes. I'm Paul.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we're diving into Susan Cain's Quiet. The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking.
It's one that so many people have told us has really stuck with them.
And yeah, for good reason.
We're going to try to boil down its main ideas for you, the learner.
In true Bookkast style.
Quickly, effectively, and hopefully with some aha moments for you to think about the world differently.
We'll be exploring what it really means to be an introvert in a society that often seems to favor the opposite.
So let's jump right in.
Cain kicks off her book with what might seem like an unusual example, Rosa Parks.
It's really interesting how she introduces Parks.
Right, when we picture her courageous act on the bus.
You might think of someone bold and assertive.
Yeah, totally.
But Cain points out that obituaries described her as soft-spoken, even timid and shy, yet possessing quiet fortitude.
That really makes you rethink the image we have, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How can someone be described as shy and courageous at the same time?
It definitely challenges that typical picture we have of a changemaker as someone loud and outspoken.
I mean, it makes you wonder what courage really looks like.
It seems like Cain is saying that bravery isn't always about those outward displays.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Sometimes it's that deep inner strength that allows someone to stand firm even when they're facing huge pressure.
Like a quiet strength?
Exactly. Parks' quiet fortitude really embodies that.
Wow, that's a powerful way to start the book.
It is.
It makes you question your assumptions about where strength actually comes from.
For sure.
And then she follows this up with another story this time about a junior lawyer named Laura in a high-stakes negotiation.
Yeah, the story of Laura leading this negotiation with these really assertive investment bankers is a perfect example of what some people call negotiation jujitsu.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So picture this. She's this introverted junior lawyer, and she's going up against 9 disgruntled bankers and their lawyer, who's described as square-jawed with a hearty manner, like the stereotypical extrovert.
So she's totally outnumbered.
Yeah, and by her own admission, she would rather been anywhere else.
I can relate to that.
But she stepped up, though, nervously.
Of course.
What's interesting is she didn't try to match their dominance.
So what does she do?
Instead of trying to overpower them or speak forcefully, she used simple questions.
And what happened?
It completely shifted the energy in the room.
Really?
The bankers stopped posturing and started having a real conversation.
It's like she disarmed them with her quiet, thoughtful approach.
Exactly. And even when one of the bankers stormed out, she didn't react in a big way.
She just stayed calm.
Yeah, and it worked.
I'm impressed.
Someone later told her that she played a good game of negotiation jujitsu, using her quiet strength in a situation that seemed tailor-made for an extrovert.
It really shows how different personality styles can be effective in their own ways.
Absolutely.
So these examples set the stage for a deeper exploration of what introversion and extroversion really mean, because clearly it's not as simple as loud versus quiet.
That's a crucial point, and Cain dives into this.
So how does she explain it?
Well, she points out that there's no single universally agreed upon definition of introversion.
It's not a clear-cut category.
Exactly. Even personality psychologists disagree some, focusing on a lack of assertiveness and sociability as defining introversion rather than that rich inner life that Jung talked about.
It's more complex than people think.
It is. And Cain emphasizes that introverts aren't necessarily hermits or misanthropes.
Meaning they don't hate people.
Right. They can enjoy social interaction, but maybe in smaller doses or in different ways.
Okay, so how is introversion different from shyness?
That's a key distinction.
Yeah.
Cain makes shyness stems from a fear of social disapproval or judgment.
So it's about worrying what others think.
Yeah, whereas introversion is about having a preference for less stimulating environments.
It's about what feels comfortable to you.
Exactly. Shyness can be really tough to deal with.
Yeah.
Well, introversion in itself isn't a problem.
Right, it's the overlap between the two that can cause confusion.
Exactly. You could be someone who loves quiet time but isn't afraid of social situations, or you could crave interaction but be held back by anxiety.
So there's a spectrum.
Yes. Cain uses a model with axes to show this. You've got the introvert-extrovert spectrum and the anxious-stable spectrum. It's like a grid.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So you can fall into any of these 4 quadrants. Calm extroverts, anxious extroverts, calm introverts, and anxious introverts.
So you could have a shy extrovert like someone like Barbra Streisand, who has this huge public persona, but also struggles with stage fright.
Right. Or a non-shy introvert like Bill Gates, who keeps to himself but isn't necessarily worried about what people think.
That makes sense.
Cain also points out how varied the experience of introversion can be based on your background and experiences.
So someone who is always told to be more outgoing might feel differently about their introversion than someone raised in a culture that values quiet contemplation like Finland.
That's a great example. Remember that Finnish joke? How can you tell if a Finn likes you? He's staring at your shoes instead of his own.
That perfectly illustrates the cultural difference in how people express themselves.
It does. And then there's this concept of highly sensitive people, or HSPs.
What's that?
It's a term used in psychology. And about 70% of HSPs are also introverts.
So what does it mean to be a highly sensitive introvert?
Imagine someone who gets easily overwhelmed in a crowded place, or who's deeply moved by music, or maybe really sensitive to criticism. HSPs are more sensitive to stimuli. They tend to have a strong conscience, and they might have been labeled shy as kids.
So they're very aware of their surroundings.
Yes, they're affected by beauty, but also bothered by noise or chaos.
So it's about this heightened awareness and reactivity to the world.
Precisely. And Cain acknowledges that with all this complexity, not everything in her book will resonate with every introvert.
Makes sense.
Some might not identify as shy or highly sensitive, and that's okay. The point is to take what speaks to you and use it to better understand the variety of human personality.
That's a great takeaway. So having laid out this more nuanced understanding of introversion, Cain then examines how society has come to prize extroversion so much. She talks about a historical shift, right?
Yeah, she discusses this transition from a culture of character to a culture of personality.
Okay, explain that.
In the 19th century, the focus was on inner virtues like integrity, honor, moral strength.
So it was about your character, your core values.
Exactly. But in the 20th century, this shifted to a culture of personality.
Where outward traits became more important.
Yes, things like being outgoing, confident, charismatic.
It became more about how you presented yourself.
Right. Cain argues that this shift was partly fueled by figures like Dale Carnegie and the rise of advertising.
Dale Carnegie, with his focus on winning friends and influencing people, was all about that extroverted ideal.
Totally. His book, Public Speaking and Influencing Men in Business, reflects this emphasis on outward skills and presentation.
And what about advertising?
Advertising went from simply informing people about products to portraying them as performers needing those products to overcome their anxieties.
Like those ads Cain mentions that warn people about being judged.
Yeah, those ones that say things like, all around you, people are judging you silently, or critical eyes are sizing you up right now.
Those are harsh.
They are, and they really highlight that societal anxiety about how we present ourselves.
It's like everyone's always on stage.
Right. And even psychology started to reflect this pressure to project confidence.
So it wasn't just about business success.
No, Cain mentions Gordon Allport's ascendant submission test, which aimed to measure social dominance.
So the emphasis on extroversion was becoming widespread.
Exactly. So what's the real cost of this for those who aren't naturally extroverted?
It seems like this culture of personality has really taken root and become even stronger over time, putting pressure on introverts to act against their nature.
Cain argues that it has. She points out that the number of Americans who considered themselves shy went up a lot in the late 20th century.
Probably because the expectations for being outgoing kept rising.
Exactly. And now even a fear of public speaking is listed in the DSM-IV as a pathology if it interferes with your job.
That shows how much our society values being able to present ourselves confidently.
It does. Cain quotes a senior manager at Eastman Kodak who said, being good at analysis isn't enough if you can't present the results well.
So you have to be able to sell yourself and your ideas.
That's become essential in many workplaces. And Cain looks at how this extrovert ideal shows up in different parts of life, even in the self-help world, with someone like Tony Robbins.
Tony Robbins is like the ultimate high-energy extrovert, right?
He is, and he's influenced millions with his approach.
But Cain points out his strong emphasis on business success and the need to sell your ideas, even in seminars that are supposed to be about personal growth.
She even got a personalized report at one of his events that advised her to not sell her ideas.
So even there's this underlying focus on outward persuasion.
Yeah, and that whole firewalk thing seems designed to push people out of their comfort zones and into a state of fearless, almost extroverted action.
It makes you think if this emphasis on becoming more extroverted is really about personal growth, or if it's about achieving a certain kind of success that's more aligned with being extroverted.
That's a great point. Cain suggests that while the push towards extroversion might have started as a way to stand out in a competitive world, now we often frame it as self-improvement.
We see being good at selling as a way of sharing your gifts.
Right. So someone like Tony Robbins is seen as a leader, not just because of his ideas, but also because of his ability to present them with such extroverted enthusiasm.
Exactly. Building on this idea of societal pressure, Cain then focuses on how this plays out in specific environments, starting with the workplace's embrace of teamwork. She calls this the new groupthink and uses Harvard Business School as an example.
Those HBS students described as polished and expecting to be in charge really embody this culture that values outward confidence and participation.
And the focus on teamwork, with mandatory participation in learning teams, seems designed for extroverts.
For sure, Cain talks about Don, an introverted student at HBS who struggles with this. He prefers to contribute only when he has something meaningful to say, but feels pressured to talk just to be seen as engaged.
It shows how uncomfortable introverts can feel in settings that prioritize constant participation.
And it's not just classrooms. Even in the wider professional world, there's this unspoken expectation to be outgoing and social, to be constantly networking.
It's like you have to be on all the time.
Right. Cain includes an excerpt from a Wharton article that compares the pressure to act extroverted to things like drinking the same scotch as the CEO or working out at the right gym.
It's about fitting into this image of what a successful professional should be.
Exactly. But Cain then challenges this idea that all leaders have to be extroverts. She introduces the concept of level 5 leaders.
From Jim Collins' book, Good to Great.
Right. These are CEOs who are known for their humility and strong will not. Their charisma. Darwin Smith of Kimberly-Clark is a good example. He quietly led his company to success without any of the typical extroverted showmanship.
That really goes against the usual picture of a leader.
It does. And then Adam Grant's research adds another layer to this.
What did he find?
Grant found that introverted leaders can actually be more effective than extroverted leaders in some cases.
When would that be?
Specifically when they're leading proactive employees.
That's interesting. Why is that?
Extroverted leaders tend to dominate conversations and might not be as open to suggestions from employees who take initiative. Introverted leaders, on the other hand, are more likely to listen carefully and then act on those suggestions.
So they create a more collaborative environment.
Yes, it's a virtuous circle of proactivity.
I like that.
It's a totally different dynamic from the top-down approach we often see with extroverted leaders.
Their ability to listen and their lack of need to control the conversation become real strength.
Exactly. And this leads to a surprising point Cain makes about introverts and the internet.
It does seem counterintuitive at first, but she argues that introverts are often more comfortable sharing personal things online.
Yeah, and they feel like they can express their true selves more freely in the digital world.
What do you think that is?
Well, the internet offers a different kind of social space. You have more control over when and how you interact, and there's no pressure of face-to-face communication.
So it can feel less overwhelming.
Exactly. It allows for more thoughtful communication.
And Cain uses the example of Craigslist, which was founded by the introvert Craig Newmark.
Newmark's goal was to connect people and help each other. And Craigslist became really important during times of crisis, like Hurricane Katrina.
It shows how powerful it can be to create spaces for connection that cater to different social styles.
For sure. It's like the screen acts as a buffer for introverts, letting them connect without the sensory overload of in-person interactions.
Right. And this brings us to Cain's critique of the overemphasis on teamwork and collaboration, which she calls the new groupthink.
Right.
She argues that while collaboration is important, we've gone too far in prioritizing it, often at the expense of individual thought and creativity.
She uses Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, as an example.
The guy who designed the first Apple computer.
Yes. He did almost all of his groundbreaking work alone, often working late into the night. He describes those quiet times as incredibly productive.
So he thrived in solitude.
He did. And his biggest breakthrough happened when he was completely alone, focused on the problem.
Cain also mentions research on highly creative people across different fields who tend to be what she calls socially poised introverts.
Meaning they're capable in social situations, but they're not naturally super sociable.
They value their independence.
Yes. And studies on experts in areas like chess and music consistently show that serious study alone is a strong predictor of achieving mastery.
Even elite athletes in team sports often spend a lot of time practicing alone.
Right. It seems like that deep, focused work that leads to real innovation and skill often requires that space for individual thought.
So this new groupthink, with its open offices and constant emphasis on collaboration, might actually be hurting creativity for some people.
Cain seems to think so. She points to research showing that traditional brainstorming sessions are often less effective than people working alone.
Even electronic brainstorming only works well when it's structured to allow for individual input before group discussion.
And then there's the issue of conformity within groups. Cain talks about those classic psychology studies where people would agree with obviously wrong answers just to fit in.
It's scary how easily our judgment can be swayed by group dynamics.
It is. So after looking at these societal pressures and the value of solitude, Cain explores the biological basis of temperament.
Okay, so what does she say about that?
She discusses Jerome Kagan's research on high reactive infants, which suggests there's a biological component to introversion and extroversion.
So it's something you're born with.
It seems so. These babies aren't antisocial. They're just more sensitive to things like loud noises or new objects because they have a more reactive nervous system.
And these sensitivities can show up in different ways as we get older.
Yeah, like being more likely to feel fear in certain situations, such as public speaking.
Cain mentions that introverts are much more likely to fear public speaking. Why is that?
Research suggests it might be linked to a more sensitive amygdala, which is the part of the brain that deals with fear and the fight or flight response.
So that feeling of being watched and judged can trigger that response more easily in introverts.
Exactly. But this sensitivity isn't always a bad thing.
What do you mean?
Cain introduces the concept of the orchid child.
The orchid child.
It's an analogy. Highly reactive children are like orchids. They're more delicate and sensitive to negative environments.
So they need more care and attention.
Yes. But in nurturing environments, they can actually thrive even more than less sensitive children. They can become more resilient and show higher levels of cognitive ability.
It's about creating the right conditions for them to flourish.
Exactly. And Cain also brings in Hans Eysenck's theory about introverts having more open information processing channels in their brains.
What does that mean?
Eysenck proposed that this leads to a higher level of arousal in introverts. So they get overstimulated more easily in busy environments, which explains why they prefer quiet settings.
Their brains are already working hard processing information.
Right. Extroverts, on the other hand, might have more closed channels, so they seek out stimulation to reach their optimal level.
So it's about finding that sweet spot for your own nervous system.
That's the key. And Cain also argues that our society tends to overvalue coolness, especially that detached kind of coolness associated with extroversion.
She makes a point about how things like blushing, which many introverts find embarrassing, can actually be a good thing.
Right. They can signal empathy and trustworthiness.
Really?
Cain mentions a study where people who blushed after admitting a mistake were seen as more trustworthy than those who didn't.
Interesting. So showing vulnerability can actually make you more likable.
Exactly. And Cain also briefly talks about the trade-off theory of evolution.
What's that?
It suggests that different personalities have advantages in different environments.
So there's no one best personality type.
Right. It depends on the context. Cain uses the example of bold versus shy fish that adapt their behavior based on whether predators are around.
So different traits can be valuable depending on the situation.
Exactly. And this also applies to cultural differences. Cain discusses how soft power and introverted strengths are highly valued in many Asian cultures.
Like what kinds of strengths?
Things like quiet strength, humility, sensitivity, maintaining harmony.
So it's a different set of values from the Western emphasis on being assertive and outspoken.
Yes. Cain mentions a brain imaging study that showed dominant poses activated pleasure centers in American brains, while submissive poses did the same for Japanese brains.
That really highlights the cultural difference in what's seen as desirable behavior.
It does. And this can be tough for people from more introverted cultures like those Asian American students Cain interviewed who are navigating Western education and workplaces.
They're caught between their upbringing and the expectations of their new environment.
It can be a real struggle. But Cain offers a more hopeful perspective with Professor Brian Little's free trait theory.
Okay, tell me about that.
Little's theory says that while we all have core personality traits, we can choose to act outside of those traits for things that are really important to us. He calls these core personal projects.
So an introvert might act like an extrovert to give a presentation on a topic they're passionate about.
Exactly, because it serves their goal of sharing their knowledge.
But this takes effort.
It does. Little calls it acting out of character, and he says it requires restorative niches.
What are those?
Those are times and places where we can retreat and be our true selves to recharge.
So it's about finding balance.
Right. And this understanding of different needs is crucial in relationships, especially between introverts and extroverts.
Because they might have different ideas about how much socializing they need or how much downtime they want.
Exactly. And Cain also debunks the myth of venting anger.
You mean that idea that it's good to let your anger out?
Yeah, the catharsis hypothesis.
Yeah.
Research shows it's not really true.
And Different communication styles can lead to conflict between introverts and extroverts.
Like when introverts withdraw during arguments and extroverts try to talk it out.
It can create a clash of styles.
It can. But Cain stresses that introverts do value relationships.
They just might connect in different ways.
Right. They often prefer deeper conversations with fewer people.
Quality over quantity.
Exactly. And this is important for parents of introverted children.
How so?
It's about understanding and accepting their temperament, not labeling them as shy, and respecting their need for quiet time.
So instead of pushing them to be more outgoing, we should nurture their strengths.
Exactly. And traditional classrooms with all the emphasis on speaking up and group work can be challenging for introverted students.
Yeah, they might do better with more independent work and opportunities for quiet reflection.
Cain suggests that teachers can create more inclusive environments by using different teaching methods, structuring group work to value all contributions, and providing quiet spaces for introverts to recharge.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And sometimes finding a passion can be transformative for introverts.
Like the story of David, who found his voice through drumming.
It gave him a way to express himself and connect with others in a way that felt authentic to him.
That's beautiful. So to wrap up, Cain offers a lot of practical advice for introverts.
Okay, like what?
She suggests creating an extroverted persona when needed for work, but also prioritizing those restorative niches.
So basically knowing when to push yourself and when to step back and recharge.
Exactly. And communicating your needs for solitude to loved ones, and spending your free time in ways you truly enjoy.
That's good advice for everyone.
It is. So as you can see, this deep dive into quiet has shown us that introversion is a valuable part of human nature that's often misunderstood, especially in our extroverted-leaning society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in true Bookkast style, we've brought you these insights in minutes.
We hope this has given you a better understanding of introversion, its strengths, and the challenges that introverts face.
Absolutely. Remember, here at Bookkast, our goal is to bring you the essence of best-selling books in minutes.
So now that you've heard the key takeaways from quiet, think about what resonated most with you. Maybe it was the power of quiet leadership, or the importance of solitude for creativity, or maybe how to better understand different temperaments in your relationships.
And then maybe the most important takeaway is what restorative niches you need in your own life.
So true.
Thanks for joining us on Bookkast.
Until next time, keep learning.
And keep questioning.